When the sun sets, the undead awaken. To slake their hunger, they feed upon the herd of unaware mortals. Right beneath our noses, the kindred clash against their rivals as they vie for control of the city of San Francisco. Are you strong enough to cheat Final Death and see another night? Vampire the Masquerade Rivals expandable card game from Renegade Game Studios.
Welcome to Vampire Wednesday, everybody. I, as usual, am Matt Holland, here to bring you some updates and news for Vampire Rivals, the expandable card game. We have a new rules clarification document that is posted today. This just has really two additions. One, we'd previously talked with Matt Hyra about adding some clarifications on diablerie to that document, and those have now been put in with the impending legality of Shadows and Shrouds. Addressing some of the rule situations that people have asked about since the revealing of those cards and the release of the expansion. And then the second one is a clarification on spending or exerting influence during schemes. The main thrust of this is that you can only contribute your influence or contribute prestige to gain influence on that first opportunity for you to do so. You cannot use abilities or relentless abilities, things like that, to add to that total later on. You just have the one opportunity. So those have both been added. That has been uploaded. You can go check it out now. If you have any questions about the technicalities of those or anything, please ask them in Discord, and we'll have Hyra talk through them when he's on the show next. This weekend, we have a Prince of the City in New Orleans, Louisiana. April 30th, it's at Go for Games. They've also done a really great job. They partnered with the New Orleans Vampire Cafe for some eating and food options. And they're also, that cafe is offering a free scavenger hunt around some of the creepiest and spookiest areas of New Orleans that can actually get you the password to their speakeasy if you want to have a drink after the tournament. So check it out. If you're anywhere near there, Go for Games is really excited about this event, and they've done a really good job of preparing and kind of going the extra mile. After that, we head overseas May 7th at May 7th in Scotland at Nightly Gaming, May 8th in Sydney, Australia at Good Games Chatswood. So this will be the first opportunity for those outside the US. Get in there and compete. Excited to see the turnout at both of those tournaments. Tonight, we have a couple of recorded interviews with some of our recent Prince winners. So hopefully you get some good takeaways from them. They give some good advice, some good talk about the meta, some tips on maybe what we can expect to see from Shadows and Shrouds and how that might change things, and just their perspective on what it was like going to one of these events. And hopefully if you show up to one of these Prince events, you can be on the show next. So please join in, enjoy these interviews. Let us know if you have any questions via Discord, and keep on playing Rivals. All right. Well, I am here with John Urbanek, who was the Prince of St. Louis, or Wood River, Illinois, technically, at the Paragon Games Prince of the City just a couple of weeks ago. John, how are you doing?
Doing great, thanks.
So congratulations, first of all. You're one of now, I think, 7 princes total. It feels nice to get that win in nice and early in the season.
Yeah, and especially when it was kind of very unexpected. So, now I can just... There is something nice when you play competitive games that if you can get that win early, you feel like you can bring goofy or fun decks that aren't competitive to other events from that point on.
Very much. And I think that is a really cool thing to just say, you know what, I got my win, I can experiment, and maybe you find something super good, but you get to play with the card pool, you get to mess with different archetypes. So that's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. The Prince of the City Paragon Games, you ran to me, it looks like a fairly standard Gangrel and Nosferatu Animal Kingdom deck that's almost all cards from the expansion from Wolf and the Rat, right?
Pretty close. Aside from, I think, Biting Comet might be the only one, I think.
Biting Comet and the Mighty Fall, right?
That's right. Yeah, the 2 Mighty Falls.
And then, I don't know, I didn't remember if Pure Pressure was core set or not, but...
no, it's not.
Okay, yeah, so cool that deck almost just came out of the expansion and kind of mashing the two Gangrel and Nosferatu decks together, it seems like, right?
Yeah, I'll have to say this up front, or else he'll never let me live it down. Colin from the What We Do at Elysium podcast is the person that basically built this deck for me at the time. It was tweaked slightly from his original, so I'm not going to give him 100% of the credit. But we went through a couple of different iterations of Gangrel, and we wanted to try stuff that was a little unorthodox in the beginning with like a Roost deck out of it.
Okay.
And then it didn't feel good enough, so we tried, going to a Hunt the Hunters deck, which was pretty strong, but we were too afraid of uniqueness with Trinity being a big problem.
Sure.
And after that, I think you guys gave the numbers out, and she was in a lot of those decks, so that was a good guess. We were right there. And then we're just like, forget it. We're just gonna go bare bones, slap some animals on it, get points, try to win the game.
Cool. Well, I did notice you are running Trinity, although she's not your leader, so I guess she's probably not central to your plan, but a nice to have.
Mm-hmm.
And then Drea Warden and Tamaska, who were tied for second place in terms of Gangrel popularity. So definitely, some vampires that were seen. Did you run into issues with uniqueness at all?
So I think I was actually the only Gangrel player at the entire event. So I never actually had to worry about Gangrel characters. I did have a problem once or twice with Nosferatu characters. In one match, I don't remember which one it was, I had Chuha out, and he got sent a torpor, and then that same player played Chuha directly after. So that was not a great feeling. But yeah, so with Nosferatu, the occasional hiccup here and there, but Gangrel, I was able to skate just free.
That's very fortunate for you. I saw that the other top 4 decks, there was an End is Nigh deck, and then 2 Turf Wars, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of Bruja and the Turf Wars, and then End is Nigh, obviously a lot of Malkavians with some help from the Venture, the Tremere. What you're obviously just playing the animals, scoring agenda off of that in Animal Kingdom. What was the biggest threat that you kind of ran into at that tournament then?
So actually the biggest problem, or the biggest threat that kind of came across, was being the man on top. There were a couple of rounds where I would end my turn and the table can see, and they are having no problem telling each other if someone didn't see it, that if we don't do exactly, if we don't do anything, he's going to win the next round. And there were, in being the man in first means, like I said, you've got a bullseye on your back. So what was interesting specifically with, I think, how Vampire Rivals as a whole works is there were times where certain players, there's nothing they can do.
Sure.
They can't stop it. So
they don't have the tools. They don't have an attacker that's ready and able to do the damage that's necessary or something.
Yeah, exactly. So you sometimes have to make decision points of, well, maybe knocking out the guy in first isn't my goal because there's nothing I can do about it. It's more important that I get some of the points on the table to put myself in second, for standing and moving forward into the race. And I think the first table that happened, one of the players couldn't stop me. The very last player before my turn couldn't stop me. So he actually knocked out my rival because it locked him into second place.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So he was the last player before you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was going to win as soon as on my turn, but he saw the opportunity to knock out my rival, which clinched it for me immediately. But because it set him down.
Because your rival had been doing pretty well and would have been in second place otherwise. Okay.
Correct.
I had to do the math there.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's an interesting, kind of unorthodox play.
Yeah, but it was really good on his part, and he was the Malkavian player that made it to the final table also. So it was. Okay. It's one of those things that you have to think about, where I feel like in other card games, especially in 1v1, that's something you don't consider.
Another thing that I think that's interesting with the 4-player pairings, it is very likely, even in a decent sized tournament, that you're going to see people more than once because you just run out of options to pair people against that haven't already played. And that sort of, in a game with so much politicking and scheming as rivals, I think has a lot of it just has a lot of potential for really interesting matches where you've now seen the tricks, you've seen kind of how they play the table, and you're now facing off again, in the top table or in the final four.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. I mean, that happened, in almost every tournament. Now you're like, oh, okay, there's that Malkavian player. I know he's doing a drain like victory condition with his conspiracies. If I'm his rival, save the money, play it a bit more conservative, but you wouldn't have known that game one.
Yep. So obviously you're playing rivals. You are now Prince of St. Louis, but tell me a little bit about, your background and like what was your entry into gaming? What got you to this point where you're playing rivals and winning a tournament?
So I've been playing card games for like a long time on and off. Like I remember I found Magic the Gathering in 6th grade back in the 90s. So it went from that to things like Pokemon and when you're a kid, finding those things. But I really started getting competitive right at the beginning of college with Legend of the Five Rings, back when it was the CCG still with AEG.
There's a lot of those L5R refugees that have come over to Rivals.
There's a lot of us. Yep. There's a lot of people. I'm like, oh, hey, good to see you. It's been a minute. And I played that competitively for a very long time, like 10, 11 years. Never, I was called the bridesmaid of L5R. I never won a tournament, but I have multiple second place victories under my belt. Including when FFG purchased the game, the very first World Championships, I took second place in that tournament. But once again, bridesmaid.
Always the bridesmaid.
Never the bride. But this time I did. The other game that I played was Doomtown, which was also an AEG title, but is now being run by Pine Box Entertainment. And one of the things that we thought that was particularly funny, and I'm glad you called it the Prince of St. Louis, by the way, this has been a note of contention for us because even though I'm from Chicago, I was born in St. Louis and raised in St. Louis.
Oh, okay. Well, perfect.
On top of that, in the Doomtown card game, they have sheriff events. We're the sheriff of the city. Okay. Well, I won St. Louis, so I'm also the sheriff of St. Louis. So I like the idea of doubling up on titles in my hometown. So
that's pretty cool. That works. That works for Vampire too, because sheriff is also a
exactly
a vampire thing.
Yeah, so Vampire came around. I actually knew little to nothing about the lore.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing in World of Darkness I knew about was I had played the Hunter the Reckoning RPG, and I was a fan of that.
The tabletop RPG or the video game?
Yeah, the tabletop RPG.
Cool.
But I just, at the time, I needed another game to play, and it sounded really interesting, and something that was multiplayer focused kind of caught my eye and made me want to check it out. And
awesome.
Here I am.
So did you kickstart it, or did you pick it up? You discovered it later on?
I did kickstart it.
Awesome.
I played in the Season 0 tournament as well. I was one of the, what was it? Was it 4 and 2 or 3 and 2 for the tokens? I don't remember what the.
There's not a lot of those tokens. I actually found the 2 extra sets.
Gotcha.
That, didn't get one that I have in my collection currently, and I was like, oh yeah, these.
Yep.
These are pretty cool.
I have those still too, so that was nice.
And now you got the leader tokens.
Those are great.
The whole set. Yeah, the tokens that Arsenal did for the game so far have been fantastic. And they pop so nicely with all the colors and the textures and everything.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, I'm glad that you have found Rivals, and I think like a lot of other people, it scratches an itch that players from certain other card games have, the clan identities and the kind of like clan loyalty. I think speaks to a lot of players. And even players like you who don't necessarily have a deep lore history, I think that as you start to play and you see the mechanics, you're like, oh yeah, I start to understand this clan a little bit. And then as I, in my job, look deeper into the world beyond just mostly Rivals, it's cool to see the mechanics and the clan and the theme all kind of come together in the game. So I don't know about you, but what clan would you consider yourself, like if you were going to be a vampire?
Oh man, that's hard,
because this is an important question because you're going to become a vampire.
I know, but I mean, Gangrel seems kind of like it, but also feels a little off. It's one of the situations that, like in other games I've played in the past, I'm not sure if it's very me specifically, but like the Toreador like idea has always been like really fun. I've always liked the kind of like
the good looking smooth ones. Like I think we all
yeah,
identify
like
as-
the kind of like that, the upper crust, if like I said, from my L5R background, I was a Crane player, so it's kind of along the same lines. But with the gangrels are great because I'm an animal fan, and that was a big part of it too. So I was like, oh, I want to play with dogs and cats, and
Yes.
throw cats at people for intel. It's great.
Our VP of Sales and Marketing, she is going to be. Well, we're all going to be vampires. They all commissioned art of all of us. Cool. Her and I are both gangrel, and her card has her dog in it too, which is that's so cool. Like be able to include the pet. I think that's really fun. So I think the gangrel is a good choice, but Toreador, I mean, you can't go wrong with that either.
Mm-hmm.
When you were preparing, like say you've been playing since season 0, you've gotten some practice, I assume. What were you kind of worried about running into, at the Prince of the City tournament, given your deck choice and like your preparation?
One of my fear was actually going to be Prestige Drain. I mean the deck wants Tamaska and it wants Drea really. I mean they're the Wonder Twins, and you've got to throw. I mean hopefully at that point you're throwing out a 3-cost body. But I mean that's what 14 of your 20. I think I can do math right. Yeah. So it's. You're paying blood to bring out your animals. Like it can put you into a position where money can be a problem. So that was kind of a fear.
Are you looking forward to the Prague City deck then, with a couple of different ways to get prestige back?
I am actually. I think the Prague deck's gonna be a lot of fun. There's a lot of stuff in there that I'm really excited for, actually.
Nice.
But like I wasn't. It was funny in the beginning. I was actually also afraid of aggression because I thought it was going to be prominent. But actually, very quickly, I did. This is kind of like a hindsight situation. I realized, actually, I'm very good against aggressive because mongrels can soak damage. The insects are soaking or soaking physical damage as well.
Sure.
And then backup is just a monster with 3 animals slapped on you. So wasn't actually till the event started that I realized like, oh, that's actually not as big of a threat as I thought.
I thought it's been interesting seeing, like at Gen Con, we saw a lot of people just going for the throat and going for kills. And at least from what I've seen in the Prince of the City events so far, it's not as common. I think because players have gotten better and have been less likely to leave themselves open to just getting wiped off the map. So people have sometimes learned the hard way, recruit some more vampires. Like don't just sit out there with 1 or 2, you're going to get blown out and taken down.
Yeah, I mean, early on playing this game, I had the same problem. I very much saw red, and you just go out into the streets and you just like, oh, just attack, and you're like, oh, why did I lose? I'm like, okay, that's you figure it out.
So obviously, big fan of Wolf and the Rat. Or what about Shadows and Shrouds? Is there anything in there, whether it's to augment your existing deck or a new archetype that you're excited for? Because I mean, players who are hearing this on Wednesday, they're going to be, one more event before Shadows and Shrouds is legal and kind of blows up the meta.
Yeah, there's Shadows and Shrouds has I think some of the most devastating attacks coming in the very near future. For a lot of different things. For gangrels specifically, I'm excited for Interrogation. They're already fairly strong with social, and even though not like we're shakedown your throwing attacks, but just seeing your opponent's hand is still a massive advantage.
Yes.
Prowess and From Pain is another one I like. That's a lot.
Also one of my maybe favorite art pieces.
It's great. It's like the blood from the eyes, and it's really nice.
So it pops.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. But from like all the new stuff coming out that's using I'm awful with the names of what are the skills? What's the new one in that set? Proteum. There's some just like disgustingly strong Proteum attacks coming. Utter Darkness is great. The targeted from Living Shadow looks incredibly strong.
AKA the card that the first time I saw it, I had to message Matt Hyra and asked, like, is this missing art, or is it just is the joke it's Utter Darkness?
Yep.
Like, okay.
Which is also why I think like the two best pieces of my two favorite art choices in this whole game are actually now Utter Darkness and Throwing Shade, which I think Throwing Shade is now my favorite art piece you guys have ever done.
There's a couple of really good kind of pun art pieces in Shadows and Shrouds like that,
Mhm.
and I do appreciate those. I think that's one of the really cool parts of the job, and obviously Matt gets to do it. Other Matt Hyra gets to do it a lot more than I do. Is coming up with the name of a card and then coming up with the art description to get turned into a card. And I've really enjoyed getting to do that for the couple of cards that I've done, like the alt arts and then these cards that we are working on for Gen Con. Because you can put in your favorite little in joke or reference or whatever, and it's just a lot of fun to do.
Mm-hmm. So, and yeah, with that too, both of the new clans look like a lot of fun as well. And I actually kind of ignored La Sombra until I played one game with some friends after that tournament.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm like, oh, I think I'm playing La Sombra in the next tournament. Like, they just, the idea of, slapping on your prestige and then spending it for other abilities is, I think, a really neat, interesting idea. And I like that a lot.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Just, and also the element of the game that is changed where you have these juicy targets that have a bunch of agenda on them. Potentially, like that's going to be kind of fun, and we're going to mess with that at Gen Con a little bit because I think it is a kind of an exciting twist to the game. It's a little spoiler of what's coming for our Gen Con plans.
There we go.
So you're talking about the next tournament. Does that mean you're going to be attending another Prince of the City event, hopefully?
Yeah, I will be at the one in Milwaukee.
Awesome. That place looks pretty cool. It's like a brewery kind of like beer hall.
Yeah, we've done some stuff there, or the guy who runs it has done some stuff there in the past, and it's always a good time. And it doesn't hurt. You can have a beer if you're like really down in the brackets. So
that's awesome. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. And hey, if you do pull out another win, then we're going to have to put your character on another card. Give you a library card of some sort to go with it. So that's kind of a fun little potential thing. Are you planning to go to Gen Con too? You're not too far away in Chicago.
Yeah, I will be there. Yep, ticket is bought and paid for. So
fantastic. Well, I'm really. It's just been really fun seeing the game being played more competitively, a changing meta with new expansions and things like that. So I appreciate you and everybody else who's coming out to the events. Is there anybody you want to give like a shout out to or a thank you because they were critical? You did mention I think Colin from. What we do in Elysium.
Yep, Colin and Alex both. We were able to do some practicing beforehand. Like I said, as we kind of whittled down decks that I didn't want to play. And just
Alex made top 4, right?
He did, yes.
And Colin too.
Yep. Colin was my rival, who I knocked out in the top cut. He
Nice.
will not let me live down that he didn't get a turn 2 at the top table because it ended that quickly. Yeah, they both were great, and it's been fun working with them. My roommate, which is AJ Valley, he did not make the table that time, but I know he went to the one I believe in Cincinnati. I think it's Cincinnati.
Dayton.
Yes, Dayton, Ohio. That's it. Thank you. I know he made the top table there, and he's going to be at if he can decide on a deck before we walk into the store, he's a big threat. So
that's one of those things with the card gamers. Like there's the people who are just the perennial switchers and like kind of always grass is greener, although like sometimes it works for them. And then the people who just pick a weapon and then they spend years studying that deck and honing it. And I think it's just fun to see the differences and the different approaches people have. Well, awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope that you have good luck at Milwaukee and then at Gen Con, maybe we'll be able to get a game in person.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Well, awesome. John, congratulations again. Prince of St. Louis and going to be showing off and holding court at Gen Con. So thanks for tuning in, and we will be covering some more Prince of the City stuff in just a little bit here. All right. I am here with Josh Drainen, the Prince of your Baltimore. Yeah. I am here with Josh.
I'm doing well. Thanks.
Yes. Josh, congratulations. First off.
I appreciate that. It was fun. It was a fun event. I had not actually played the card game tournament before.
Oh, really?
No.
Well, that ties into the first question. I would love to hear a little bit about you and sort of your gaming history and like journey, like what led you to playing Rivals and to being here at the tournament.
Gotcha. So I started with everybody else did probably with 40K way back in the day, Warhammer 40K is a tabletop game. And then after college, when I moved to the DC area, I went with War Machine Hordes because it's way more fun and cheaper at the time anyway. And then after that, I went to Guild Ball. And so I've been kind of looking around for a new game. And one of my friends is not very into miniature tabletop games. And he is a huge fan of card games. And he kind of got me and my whole group into this. So then there was 3 of us actually that went all the way up from my local store to the tournament.
What's your local store?
Huzzah Hobbies.
Oh yeah, okay. I know a lot of people out in the Nova area from my previous job and other games, so I'm familiar with some of the stores down there. So you're a miniatures gamer born and bred, now playing and winning in a card game.
Yes, I mean, as is natural, I'm sure. The tactical placement of distance measurement, eyeballing, range, all of that is very important in Rivals.
Yes, Hydra is definitely 8 inches from that SAD, so he can definitely charge and take it out. Well, that's interesting. That is a different, origin story from the other winners I've talked to so far. A lot of them coming from Magic the Gathering, things like that. So, were you familiar with World of Darkness at all before Rivals, or was this kind of your first exposure?
Yeah, I had some friends who were really well, that's not entirely fair. I did Kickstart. There was a Kickstarter for a different Vampire the Masquerade card game.
Mm-hmm.
That I did because I thought it looked cool. You were competing for different territories, and I forgot what it's actually called, but it was Kickstarter. It was not bad. I enjoyed the mechanics of this one a little bit better.
Okay, awesome.
The other one's not so much a deck builder, right? It doesn't have as much pre-planning and kind of interactions that you have to work out and account for.
Sure. Well, that's pretty cool. So your first card game tournament, obviously, I'm guessing you've played miniatures tournaments before. Yeah. So the competition aspect is not necessarily new, but the type of game that it is is a little bit more kind of new to you. So how did you come up with the deck? Did you have any help with that? Did you just kind of learn it and come up with it on your own?
So historically, I would say the thing about me is I really enjoy thinking about all the different interactions one can come up with. So I will sit around and make decks up just for fun.
Yep.
How I came up with this particular deck. So this deck it's a General Flint deck, and the goal is get General Flint starting, get Clandestine turn 1, because I use the university library to be able to draw cards, and I basically just draw until I get Clandestine. My turn, their turn, whatever it takes until I can't do it. And lean heavily into the 2 of them. The reason, so I also use Invisible Army, which is the
Invisible Army is the agenda, and that's the one where you want to have none of the mortals in the streets, correct?
No, that's the Vagrant one. So
you're right.
I get 2 points for attaching Vagrants, and more importantly, for the best thing about that,
Horde the Herd I'm confusing with Horde the Herd. That's because it is 8 a.m. my time.
One of the things I love about that particular agenda is it's really hard to shut me out, because if other people also go kill Vagrants to deny me the 2 points, then I can kill them and at least get a point.
Sure.
And if my rival is doing it, then I'm killing them and getting 2 points anyway.
Yep.
And in General Flint scales up for having retainers attached, specifically retainers, not cards, but just retainers. So he wants to farm up something anyway. So that's why I didn't do something like, Hunt the Hunters, because you don't get anything. It doesn't help him get stronger. And since I want to be get stronger anyway, this was the best agenda I could find or could come up with that would allow him to get retainers and help me score while he's powering up. Because with 1 retainer, he gets Shield Pierce 1. With 2 retainers, he gets Shield Pierce 1 and +1 damage. And that's when he comes fully online, because it needs a 3 physical, right? And Clandestine is a 2 social, but Veiled Threat on turn 2 lets her hit for 5. And she gets +1 when she's attacking city mortals. So she's automatically a 3 and can kill any mortal from the start except SAD.
Sure.
So that was kind of the idea behind the deck, is how do I play into this, get my people powered up quickly. The other aspects, and I do a bunch of this when I was looking at deck building, because my other favorite deck is the Malkavian deck, Malkavian Conspiracy deck. But the problem with the Malkavian Conspiracy deck is it's a 6-turn deck.
Sure.
It's actually a 7-turn deck unless you find a way to score an extra point in the middle, right? And so it's a great deck because it has a timer, but it doesn't get faster.
Yeah.
And if you look
Does
at
it have a lot of acceleration options?
right, and if you look at an Invisible Army deck, you're like, oh, so potentially I have reasonable chance to get 4 points a turn, right? Either get 2 vagrants if they're out, or I kill somebody with a vagrant, and maybe if it's my rival, and that's 2 points. The other big thing is it can spike for up to 8 points a turn. If your rival has 2 vagrants attached, and you have Lisa Holt in your party, then you kill someone who's a rival, that's 1 point. They have a vagrant attached, that's a 2nd point. Lisa Holt lets you take a retainer from them and attach it to you. You take their vagrant and attach it, and that's 2 more points. So that's a 4-point action.
Yeah.
And so potentially you can score 8. Now I've never done it, but potentially you could score.
It's nice to have the threat. Yeah.
And it really plays strong, because that also plays into anyone who's trying to deny you vagrants by taking them, even if it's not your rival, you go, well, I still kill you for 1 and then attach it. So that's 6 points or 3 each. So the whole deck is built to hit very hard, be hard to stop, and score, and it has a better scoring economy than most decks I could come up with.
I got you. Let me just. Oh, okay. So I noticed you've got a 43 card deck, which goes against the traditional wisdom of card game players. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, I mean, so the goal there, right, is to have to have the smallest deck possible, so that the cards you want the most come out the most regularly.
Yeah, yep. That's the conventional wisdom, and I think mathematically, technically better. I'm just wondering, were you aware of that? Why did you go with 43? What card could you just not cut that you wanted to keep in there?
So there was a couple cards that I flexed my size all the way up until the day. I didn't have enough practice opportunities for 4-player games, and I wasn't sure what the Princess City event was going to be, what format. There's cards that didn't make it in, but I always thought might be really good in a 4-player game, things like Second Tradition. It's not worth it to me to spend an action on it in a 2-player game.
Certainly.
But a 4-player game, where especially if I want to try and lock down things like vagrants, that's one of my choices. So yes, I'm aware of the wisdom. I would say the reason I'm willing to flex a little bit on that is General Flint with University, right? University.
Because you're drawing so many cards.
Yeah.
Anyways,
exactly.
That makes sense.
I can dig for it, and there's a couple of cards in there that I almost never play but have a lot of value. Swarm is a really good one, right? I never play Swarm because I would much rather spend my 2 actions, almost always, making attacks, either killing retainers and attaching them, attacking my opponent and put them on their back foot so they have to change their style of play.
Sure.
But I love drawing them and then discarding them to heal. And the reason is because I also have the gun from Nosferatu, who scales up based on the number of swarms in my discard pile, right? So I could cycle through those.
Okay.
And have them in a real, if someone's coming after me heavy, then I could throw them into my parties, right? Get 1 defense against all physical and range. That's really good.
Yeah.
I just don't need it all the time. And I think maybe there's 1 Spymaster card in there just in case, conceptually, it was this is a card that you will almost never need, but if you have it at the right moment, game is backbreaking good, right? Oh, are you about to win?
Well, you're talking about spy games. Spy games where you take their rival thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. There's 1 or 2. There's 1 of those in there. I have a couple of random flexes that almost never come up, but I in general have a return on investment challenge. Every time I look at playing a card, I go, oh man, Shakedown is amazing. And it can be really impactful to take all their attacks away.
I got you.
Just hit them for 4 or 5.
Yeah. Well, and so it's just interesting, that yes, that goes against the conventional wisdom. It does sound like you did it deliberately, and obviously it worked. So, nobody can tell you that was the wrong decision. I just think it's interesting because yet
to say for sure it wasn't a bad decision. but we'll say, like, I definitely started with a 60 card deck and then started looking at, like, every time I play, even with University Library, I'm only going through maybe 20 cards of my deck, right? And that's with me drawing aggressively to drain my health on their turn and my turn. So if I'm only ever getting through at most 20 cards, and maybe in a long 4-player game, it's 25, almost 30, but you're not normally getting close to the bottom. So there is a lot of value to not overpopulate your deck, because you just aren't going to get through it.
Yep, and that's I think kind of where people go. University Library has obviously been very, very popular. I think just among, especially just card game players, because card game players tend to know card draw is options. Card draw is
King.
is the most helpful thing generally that you can do, because it just gives you the ability to do other things.
That or mill. If it's a game where you shuffle and restart your deck, milling is the other card player strategy.
Yes. Yep. I just think it's kind of interesting. From a miniatures game background, you also identified that as, a really useful tool, and that's kind of cool. So you're playing Invisible Army. First off, did you run into any issues with uniqueness? Like, did you have to bid to get Flint? Did you have anything like that was tricky?
I did not personally have to deal with that. Most of the people, a lot of people at our tournament, there was like 3 different people playing Ventrue title decks.
Mm-hmm.
They had that problem. There was 2 people who were playing Tamasta Gangold decks with beasts. I would say that and this is, I don't know, I think I saw one of your other interviews you guys called out that, it is not something where you have to spend a ton of time working on decks to come out and have a good time. And that's certainly, I would say, true for our event. Half the people there had played with their family, but didn't have like a local group they played with.
Sure.
Had played with themselves, hadn't actually played with real people before, right? And we're kind of either learning the game, not necessarily all starter decks, but learning the game, or hadn't maybe refined their deck as much as I had, put effort into it. So not many people, in fact, nobody else was playing Nosferatu.
Well, that's helpful for you. I think it's interesting that, and that's the thing that I've explained to people, like, if you're thinking about coming out to one of these events, come, because there's a lot of, like, the whole point of these events is to bring in some of those people who are further away, that it's, if you live 2 hours away from from a store that has an active scene, it may not make sense to drive out there on a Wednesday evening, to play a really small casual event. But these events are attractive enough and designed to bring in that greater community and let people make the connections from other people who are playing, in their area, and kind of inspire more play groups to start up, get people playing. So that's great to hear that you guys had that kind of happening there in Baltimore.
Actually, the furthest drive was 6 hours.
Geez Louise. See,
one
there you go.
One person made a trip from Florida, but they were a flight attendant, so I think they hopped a plane because they could. But the furthest like effort drive was 6 hours each way.
Oh, there you go. And I mean, and that's the kit is designed to have prizes that, and especially a first prize that make it fun. Worth taking a day, a long day, and going and playing. So
I will say the hard plastic agendas that were given out as part of the promos, super nice. Love that.
Those are
art, but also
maybe my favorite. My favorite sort of thing is just plastic cards like that. They're just so satisfying to throw it on the table. And it's just like an instant flex. Like, oh yeah, here you go.
Oh, do you not have one of these? That's weird. No, I'm kidding. I will say the motivator for us to go originally, or at least for me, was Victor. I wanted the promo card from Gen Con because I had made a couple of entry lists, and I was like, oh, I don't have that card. Oh, the only place I can get it is to go to Prince of the City, Baltimore. So win or lose, I'm showing up for that.
There you go. And that's the thing too. Like, the prizes should give you cool stuff no matter how you do. So
exactly.
What sort of decks or like strategies, what were you worried about going into the event, knowing your deck, knowing its strengths and weaknesses?
So I would say I wasn't actively worried about anything. It sort of depends. I have to change the way I play based on what's there.
Mm-hmm.
Often I actually only run 2 vampires instead of 3 because I don't want to take the turn to put out a 3rd vampire.
Sure.
But if someone's actively, like, if I look
gunning for you at all,
fighters, like some active, aggressive fighters, especially if the person who's going to be fighting me has an aggro deck, then I'll put a third one out. But otherwise, you can't kill Flint because his goal is to attach 2 things, and his goal is to then attach 2 vagrants, ideally, right? Because of the invisible army, which makes him very tanky since he's fighting himself up and down. And the advantage of only attaching 2 vampires, which again, this is not conventional wisdom. Everyone's gonna be like, "Oh man, that guy just got lucky." I would say that I've won 85% of my games with this deck, so I would maybe more. So it's not just luck, but the advantage of only using 2 vampires is the prestige. So I actually have 9 prestige, which gives me the buffer, because the concern of running a 6 and a 5.
Yeah,
right.
That if you were to
6
put
and a
another one
5
into play, you're now very low on prestige.
Right. I try to never go below 5 as my based on vampire summoning, right? So have at least 5, but that is the weakness potentially of the deck, is being forced to pull out a 3rd vampire. However that happens, if you spike damage and kill somebody. I pulled out Bad Penny a couple times this time because I like her, because she has the tank set the other 2 don't have.
Okay.
And she comes back, right? She comes back in 1 turn if you discard a card to get the extra healing, which puts me at 15. So that's the risk. This specific deck doesn't have any prestige generation. And that's harder to find in a lot of decks, which was weird for me coming from Algavian, which is what they do, right? They spend prestige, but they farm it like crazy too, especially as a conspiracy deck, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm ideally getting 2 every time I finish conspiracy.
So are you?
Others does. That's why everyone goes with that. It's because it gives you prestige, which gives you a buffer against those particular kinds of attacks.
Makes sense. So are you excited for Shadows? Well, sorry, Shadows and Shrouds we'll talk about in a second, but Heart of Europe, the city deck in Prague, has the mortals can all give you prestige if you burn them.
I did not know that. So I actually didn't know about the Prague deck at all until I went to the Prince of the City and everyone was talking about it.
Oh yeah, you should watch our Renegade Con panel where Matt and I, we actually go through the city deck and talk about the different events and the new antagonist and the new mortals and stuff. There is some prestige generation built into the city deck now.
Nice.
So just to give some options. Yeah.
Yeah, it was certainly with the Shrouds expansion, right? They're all about burning mortals. So you're going to do a lot more of that. And interestingly, I appreciate it because right now there's little advantage to burning mortals. Like you almost 98% of the time you attach retainers unless you don't want to take the spot.
Or unless you're almost dead.
Right.
In which case it's risky to be out in the streets.
Right. Yeah. That's when you burn it for health. Every other time you attach it. So there's not much of a decision right now for the most part. So I appreciate that change because I think that is going to be very impactful. That's going to make, you're going to have to make that decision every time.
Yep.
Because there's the hardest thing to stop and one of the strongest strategies, right, is draining prestige by either killing or by doing things like biting comment.
Exactly. Yep.
Play conspiracy. However,
and I think that's the rationale that Hyra used, when developing things in that direction. So we shall see. So speaking of Shadows and Shrouds, what in there are you like? Is there anything in there that you're really excited to add to your deck, or maybe a new deck archetype that you want to try?
I have a potentially more effective version of this deck.
Nice. You don't have to spoil everything. I'm just kind of curious.
Oh, no, I've already posted on the Discord channel, which, by the way, very helpful people, awesome channel. Everyone should go to join the Discord. I've got quick questions, quick answers to the 2 or 3 rules questions I've asked.
Awesome.
I made a deck that hits for potentially as much as 8 on turn 2.
Ouch.
Attack, so you can start popping anybody because the base stat is as much as 2. So they don't have a defensive card, which is harder to find defensive cards that reduce damage. Right, a lot of them are reactions that cause damage back, but the deck it is almost impossible to stop. The deck can hit as hard as 8 on turn 2, but 6 without needing the right wraith.
Owie. That's there's a lot of fun stuff in there. I'm excited to play a little bit of La Sombra, but there's one more event. This weekend's event does not allow Shadows and Shrouds, and after that, it's open season. So I'm very curious to see how things shake out and how the meta changes.
I liked a lot of what they did in that deck. I like the design space they went into. Right, Akata was much more interesting to me than Lasombra as a whole, just because the victory points on yourself mechanism is hard to action. You have to take a specific agenda, or the concept almost doesn't exist. Right, there's one other vampire that lets you take them off when you're doing it. So it's really hard to play into without some constraints of you have to have that agenda to get the real value out of it. And the Sombra are expensive enough where at the moment, I feel like you have to take that haven that lets you spend victory points off your vampires to reduce the cost.
Reduce the cost, yeah.
Otherwise, I feel like in general, like their 4s and 5s, they have maybe one character under 4.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It was too limiting in the design, in like my gameplay choices and how I wanted to build to have to use those two things, right? I mean, University Library is really hard to give up.
Yeah, especially once you're used to it, you don't want to lose it.
Well, right, and I struggled, but I eventually came up with a deck that focuses on the race, which I love. I even like I like the Oblivion. I think it's a much more effective, maybe, way to deal with rituals. Because you don't have to hurt yourself to do it. I like that aspect, and I actually liked the default deck with the trying to keep people in torpor. And
yes, that's kind of a fun play style too.
But and so that's a really fun mechanic to play around. It just didn't score. I didn't, and to be fair, I've only played 5, 6, 7 games with those decks. It didn't score fast enough. It didn't. I mean, obviously, I told you I calculate the number of turns and how much I can score on average at a turn, things like that. It didn't meet those requirements, but the Wraith mechanic was very interesting to me. Partly it's random, which is admittedly somewhat of a struggle to accept. But Kappa helps a lot because it gives you +1 damage if you have a Wraith, right? Whether it's flipped or not, whether it's tapped or not, and it's an all the time +1 damage for everyone in your party, for whoever the attacker is, as long as they have a Wraith and he's in the party.
Nice. So are you planning to attend any of the other Prince events?
I mean, it would be disingenuous, I think, if I just went to ownership like all of the US. You'd be like, oh, if it's in the Eastern US, I'm the guy to talk to.
I mean, Brandon and Phil have already agreed to split, east of the Mississippi and west of the Mississippi. So you're horning in on Phil Geitke's territory.
I mean, if that was his goal, they've already failed because I own Baltimore, right? They're not taking that from me right now. I'm currently not planning on traveling for an event. Work's been picking up, so I went to that one. Partly Baltimore is awesome, and it's only an hour and a half.
Sure.
So that was an advantage. I didn't, play an Adepticon or anything. I took the deck with me, but I didn't end up playing while I was there. I didn't run into one. I don't think you guys are running any events.
No, not at Adepticon. Adepticon is
right? It's a miniature convention.
Well, it is, but there's also a history of things like L5R, Destiny, a lot of the FFG games. So it's not out of the question that we'd hold a tournament at Adepticon in the future. This year, with especially Omicron variant of COVID, around the time we had to make those decisions, it was just tough to make the call. And I love Adepticon. I love Hank and his crew. So I would love to be involved with them at some point in the future. And I think that honestly, the Adepticon crowd has a lot of potential to enjoy Vampire the Masquerade. Just the setting, the darkness of it sort of resonates with a lot of the stuff that you see there. So
I mean, we talked about 40K, right? That's 40,000 years in the future, where the most common resource is humans.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean,
this is kind of their thing.
I could sell a vampire to some of that crew. Are you going to go to Gen Con, you think, or?
Not this year. So the other convention I was going to go to was probably Nova Open, which is a local convention to me. But that also ties partly to my background, right? My background being miniature games. The conventions I know most relate to are tied to that.
Indeed. History. Understandable. Well, this has been really cool. It's been cool to hear your perspective on the deck and how things went. First off, any advice to players who are considering going to one of these, that you thought was particularly helpful or that you have come up with?
So I actually asked for advice about, what's it mean to go to a card tournament since I'd never been. And my friends gave me some advice about and most of it's common sense, right? Don't touch other people's cards. Don't just reach. You can indicate things, stuff like that. The big advice though is don't be shy. Like, go have fun, talk to people. You're there doing the same thing they're doing. We're all there because we like the game and we're having fun playing it. So you might as well go.
You have something in common with everybody who's at the tournament as soon as you walk in the door, regardless of anything else. That's a great point.
I showed up and someone gave me a smoke card. He was like, "Oh, I've got all these, and I didn't have enough people to give them out to. So do you want a smoke card?" And I was like, "Well, that's one I don't have. So sure, love it, right?" Like literally walked around and tried to get smoke cards and whatever other promos they had extras of to everyone that were there, that was there, so they could make friends.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
The guy locally that we didn't know who played the game, and now we're going to incorporate him in some of our game minutes.
That's fantastic. Yeah, we saw the same thing with the promos at the Roseville event that I attended. Like, oh, you're a newer player. Like, oh, hold on, let me run out to the car and grab a couple of the extra, because we had some players there who were at Gen Con, so they had some of that swag, things like that. Well, one more question for you, Josh. What clan would you be if you were a vampire?
I mean, I leaned heavily into Nosferatu for this particular deck, and since I didn't have a ton of exposure to Vampire the Masquerade as a concept, I'm okay with that. Balkavian was my other love, and that's where I struggled for a bit, quite a while actually. But Nosferatu is, if given the choice, Nosferatu is where I would go. I guess nice. One question I had that I wasn't sure, maybe because I haven't looked it up. So you guys are as a reward, or we'll call it a reward for winning the tournament, right? You're reporting us in cards into the game, which is cool. Really awesome.
Yeah.
Is that going to be backfilled into the RPG?
You're talking like, will the character that we create for you in the card game show up in the RPG?
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say it's impossible. There's definitely potential for us to, as we have done already, like we took Victor and Annabelle from the RPG and brought them into the card game. It is not out of the question for it to go the other way. Of course, if you're playing the RPG, you could absolutely use, your art and your character in that and sort of develop a mythos around it. So it's not impossible, but is definitely a thing that you could do and kind of continue to build the mystique or the.
That was the other question all my friends had. They go, so if you played the card, Josh, do you get some kind of
special kicker if this is played by Josh Drennan, gets +1 blood or something?
Exactly. I was like, I'm sure that's definitely not the way it's going to work, but why don't I ask, Mitch? Just throwing it out there, just a thought.
As cool as it would be to have all of the winners of all of our tournaments, be canon princes in the World of Darkness that kind of has an ongoing storyline. Mm-hmm. That gets very tricky and very messy very quick, because every year some crazy event has to happen that changed up the prince. So we aren't.
Maybe. It might also pull in a bunch of people that wouldn't want to play the game just because card games aren't their thing, except for the fact that they're like, I love the RPG, and they might even get competitive in their courts, threatening to go to a Prince of the City event to try and win and take ownership of the city in the story.
Oh man. Yeah, it's like the vampire cinematic universe, everything ties together. I think we're a little bit a ways away from doing that, but I know we're going to do some more stuff involving significant characters or even NPCs from the RPG in Rivals. But I guess we'll see. It's still early days,
Exactly.
We're just having our first sort of season of major events, so I don't want to rule anything out, but that's a cool idea.
Maybe if you guys made one city, and it could even be a hidden city, right, where that literally is just tied to this game and an interconnection between the two. So what you have is all the princes of the city end up having a story battle over that one place instead of, we're the representatives sent from each individual place in the real world.
Well, that's kind of what Gen Con is. So Gen Con is the Continental Conclave for North America. So there, the conclave is a camarilla thing that is called when they need to make big decisions and stuff. All the princes show up, they negotiate and vote. So at Gen Con, we're going to have the tournament. The princes are going to have some special perks and some special opportunities to interact with the development staff and help make some decisions about the game. And the city deck, we're pulling out all the events from the Prague city deck and replacing them with 10 new events that all focus on the events of this conclave. So there's the opening ceremonies, there's a whole bunch of, all 10 events are completely new art, completely new effect, and focus around this gathering of powerful vampires. So
what you're really saying is I should reconsider my plans for Gen Con. That's what I just heard.
I would say anybody who is a prince, Gen Con is going to be pretty fun. There's going to be some cool swag for everybody, but also some extra stuff for just princes. And you're going to get to have even more impact on the game than you already will have being a vampire. So think about it.
Vampire lord, sir. I am royalty.
Vampire prince. Yes, true. My apologies. Well, Josh, thank you so much for joining me and chatting. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I hope that we see you at future events, whether it's Gen Con, Prince of the City, or just playing locally. And thanks for kind of being an ambassador for the game.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks so much for talking.
All right, take care. Well, next up, I am here with Robert Bruce, the Prince of Berkeley, California. Robert, how are you doing?
Doing great.
Enjoying your reign there in sunny San Francisco?
Oh yeah.
So I would love to just start off, tell us a little bit about your background, like how you came to start playing Rivals, like how you got into gaming in the first place. I know I just talked to Josh. He came from a miniatures gaming background, so it's interesting to hear the kind of the diversity of what led people to be playing Rivals and to become a prince.
Yeah, so I've been playing card games since I was in junior high. I played Magic the Gathering back in like 94, 95. So way back. And I wasn't competitive, but I played it a little bit. And then kind of fast forward more to when I was in college, I started getting more into sort of the competitive scene, a little bit of Magic, but I wasn't very good. And then I kind of dropped out of that and then ended up back sort of once I started, having money because I had a job, I was able to sort of spend more money on stuff like this. And I kind of always wanted to get back into it. So that was right around the time where LCGs started to be really popular.
Sure.
And the competitive ones always interested me. So I played a little bit of Conquest. I played a little bit of Netrunner. That was kind of big for me. I think that was just, a beautiful game. And then I also played L5R because I'd actually played L5R back when it in the old
CCG
version
days.
as well.
Sure.
Yeah. I wasn't very good at that either, but with new L5R, I sort of picked it up and kind of treated it a little bit more seriously. So that's probably the biggest competitive scene I got into with LCG. I didn't get very far, but it was super fun.
And for anybody who's just real quick, for anybody who's watching who is not familiar with LCG, that is the living card game. It's very similar to the model that Rivals uses. We call Rivals an expandable card game instead of a living card game, just because of living card game is a copyrighted term. So it's kind of similar to Rivals in the way that it works, where it's not random packs.
Yes. So that was a fun game. I played that competitively. Honestly, a lot of the people from here and the LA scene are old Legend of the Five Rings players, old Game of Thrones players, old Netrunner players, and some Magic the Gathering players as well. So there is sort of a lineage. Not that there aren't some people that are completely new, but a lot of us come from sort of a lineage of competitive card games, and I'm one of those people. Yeah.
That's pretty neat. I know I have seen a lot of familiar faces from Legend of the Five Rings and Game of Thrones in particular, just from my old job. And I think that Rivals speaks to a lot of those players because of the clans, because of the heavy thematic nature of the clans and just like with houses or clans in those games. But it's great to see, that people who wanted a new game have found a new home, in Rivals. And it's been fun to see people again. So when I look at your deck, you're using Knowledge is Power, and the University Library. University Library was a very popular haven, and it really, I think that it speaks to card game players a lot, because card game players know card draw is king. Can you talk a little bit about how you landed on this as opposed to other options, and really what your sort of special twist on it was?
Yeah. So I always consider myself more of a sculptor than a painter. I see other people's ideas and then I take them and try to make them better. I'm not good at coming up with the original idea. Honestly, the original idea for this deck, and I'm sure, it's kind of a downwind of the design, so it's kind of makes sense, but Alejandro is sort of the piece, right? So getting basically figuring out that University Library and Alejandro work so well together, because Alejandro gives you draws off of healing, and you want to heal because you're getting draws, because you're losing blood,
spending blood.
Right. And this was the best method to get to that 10 cards consistently, right? So that's the combo is sort of seeing that, and then everything else comes from that, right? Everything else is outward of that. And the person I saw this doing this first was a person on Ed, and he's Satyr Thrust on some of the boards,
Okay.
and he plays in our local meta. And so I kind of just took a lot of ideas from what I saw in his deck that was working, and then I adjusted a little bit. I think, mainly the things that I did differently was move some vampires around. I tried to tech for the current meta. I use what's the card? The Tremere card, where you're stealing a blood from somebody, or you're stealing a prestige from somebody and healing.
That is a good question off the top of my head. I don't know.
Yeah, I haven't memorized all the cards yet. That shows you my level of dedication. But I remember the effect. So if you all remember the effect of that card, it's a great card.
Seek knowledge or innervate?
Innervate, that's it. So it's
There we go.
Innervate, and Innervate was something I didn't see anybody else using. And actually, in the Berkeley event, I knocked somebody out by double innervating them off turn. So basically, I saw that the point system was set up so that I would win if I knocked somebody out who wasn't my rival, because of the way the points were set up. And I happened to have the 2 innervates, so I could drain them, and they were at 2. So that's, I like things like that. And that's kind of what I did, was add some tech in to basically help me for those kind of situations. So yeah, that was my little spin.
That's one of the things I noticed looking at your deck list. You have 2 1-ofs and quite a few 2-ofs in there, which is a little bit unusual just from what I've seen for the top deck list. A lot of people just running 3 of straight 40 cards. And I guess some of that stuff is the little special sauce or twist that you threw in there to tech for what you were expecting.
Yes. And so here's the thing is this deck is the best to run with 2-ofs, because you're going to see, so in any typical game, and you probably know this, any typical game, you're only going to probably see the top 18 cards at most, probably top 14 cards.
Sure.
And in this deck, you're going to see a lot more. And so you're going to quickly get through your cards. So going 3 of in most decks is necessary, because you want to see those cards.
Makes sense.
In this deck, you're going to see more of your cards. So going 2 of sometimes is just the same or almost the same. So I had a little bit more room to be kind of wild with different stuff.
And now you said you won one by essentially prestige draining someone and then having the most agenda. Were most of your wins though just getting to 13 first?
Yes, so I think in this game, it's always good to have a primary strategy and then some secondary strategies for situational. So, one of the things that's different about this game than any other game, and what draws people to it, is the 4-player aspect. And then the city deck. So that creates a lot of things you can't control, right?
Yeah, a lot of unknowns that you have to be ready for.
Right. And so what that means is, more than any other card game I've played, you need to have pivotability, and you need to be able to pivot in the right ways that will come up most often. So the main strategy for the deck is, get to 13. But it's so hard to guarantee you're going to be able to get to that. So what if somebody knocks somebody out, right? What if somebody gets, what if somebody knocks you out, right? There's lots of things. What if the city deck just hurts you so bad you can't deal with it? And you need to be able to basically try to deal with those, side situations. And one of the ways that I, tech is to have something ready so that if somebody does get low in prestige, I can try to go out that way. So that was the idea.
Is another one, I'm guessing, Street Preacher. If somebody is about to get knocked out, you can jump in and block an attack that can keep them in the game and give your time to score.
Yes. And then there's also, and I'm, you can tell I'm bad at memorizing the card names, but there's also a reaction where I can play it and for anybody in the streets. Right.
Yes, I know the card you're talking about. I can't think of it off the top of my head. Okay.
So that actually saved me and the rest of the table in the very last game in Berkeley. Right. So there was a situation where somebody was about to get knocked out. And of course, I don't want that because then somebody else is going to win.
Mm-hmm.
So I threw down one of those, and it was the reason why I was eventually able to win, is having that. And so that's a powerful card. Any card that you can. So Street Preacher, anything that can jump into the streets and block anybody has a natural value because of that game state change possibility. Yeah,
sure, that makes a lot of sense, and that's cool. It's definitely showing, the usefulness of thinking about the meta, thinking about what you're expecting to see, and coming up with solutions for it. And then, as Hyra and I have said in like all of our different prep videos, you got to have more than one way to achieve your objective, because you never know. There's so many things that you cannot necessarily plan for that can happen between city deck and 3 other players. But that's great to illustrate that point, that having something there that can help is very useful. And in your case, your ability to draw so many cards allows you to maybe a little bit more easily have those solutions in hand at the right time. But that's pretty handy. Is there anything that you were like really, outside of just, somebody might knock somebody out, like anything you were particularly worried about or, were glad to not run into?
Fear.
Okay.
Fear is bad for Alejandro, right? So Alejandro, everybody hates fear. I mean, like everybody dislikes getting their main person feared. But in this deck, the main weakness is that everything goes through Alejandro, right? Everything goes through your leader, whoever it is. Mm-hmm. And so if he gets feared for one turn, you're off, right? Because you're hoping you're banking on 3 points a turn, maybe 4 points a turn in order to beat everyone else.
Yep.
And if somebody fears you, it's bad. So there's a Tremere character that people were playing that fears if it does damage. Mm-hmm. Super good tech against Alejandro. Obviously Apex Predator, come on, that was like in every deck.
Yeah, everybody who could run Apex Predator was running 3 copies of it.
And part of that is because Alejandro's around, because decks like that are around. It's like Apex Predator is just a perfect way to deal with that. So everything, a lot of what I ended up teching towards the end was trying to deal with the threat. So shakedowns are absolutely necessary. So shakedowns is a 3 of in the deck, because and pretty much whenever I run shakedown, if I get it in my hand, I play it as soon as possible, right? Because it's like I gotta make sure that they don't have Apex Predator. Or in some cases, a sucker punch can be really bad. If they can fear my person and then they can get past a block, then that's a problem.
Yes. Shakedown is that's the one that lets you look at the target opposed hand, name an attack type, and they discard all attack cards of that type. So really helpful. And like you're saying, helps you kind of turn off at least one axis of threat for a turn there. That makes sense. So looking ahead, we have our last event with just the current meta happening this weekend. Is there anything in the Shadows and Shrouds expansion that you're really excited about? Like you want to add to this deck, a new deck you want to try? Tell me about what's your thoughts on Shadows and Shrouds?
Yeah, I'm gonna try to, I haven't memorized all the cards yet. There are lots of cards that are very interesting. I think are going to shake up the meta. There is the Big House. That's the Diablerie Haven. That is going to be big. I think that's going to bring aggression back in a big way. That's my theory. So if I'm running Alejandro, I'm probably going to try to find a way to deal with that.
Sure.
For Alejandro, the Clairvoyance, and there's another one where it's an action. You play it and you can look at their hand. You can pull the top card off their deck.
Yeah. It's we talked about those when we did the previews for it. Clairvoyance and another one from that expansion that are similar effects in that you can mess with your hand and get rid of cards.
Those fit naturally into Alejandro because they want Auspex, and Alejandro has Auspex.
Nice.
And he likes actions more than anyone else, right? In this deck. So those are going to be naturally something that goes in there as a tech against other cards. There's a mental attack that fears. I think it's Utter Darkness. Is that right?
I believe so.
So that is also something that really scares.
My favorite art in the game.
Yes, great art. And that is a scare for Alejandro because that's unblockable fear.
Sure.
So yeah,
it doesn't require dealing damage or anything like that. It just it's a
Shadows and Shrouds is going to be a big meta shift. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
I think it's going to be very, very interesting. And then we have a bunch of events that happen, with that legal. And I think a lot of the lessons learned are not necessarily, these first events are not necessarily wasted, but you're going to have to, take them with a grain of salt, knowing that the battlefield has shifted quite a bit.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I think that's there's a lot of good options there, just for what you're doing, to address, to boost that and to maybe have to keep an eye out for. But then also, La Sombra and Hakata have their own kind of new avenues. Are you interested in either of those play styles? Or are you pretty happy with what you're running?
You know what I think is interesting about the design is that it never occurs to me until a little bit later how to make the new vampires work. They always do. But it's always a little bit of a puzzle box. And I think that's cool. Like, I really like that. It took me a while to figure out like Thin Bloods. It took me a while to figure out like Gangrel. But once you start to see, like, now Gangrel's everywhere, right? It's like, but for a while there, it was like, how does this work? How does Gangrel work? I don't get it. And then it's like, oh, okay, here you go. I think Hakata is one of those that people haven't quite figured out. It's a bit of a juggle, right? But it's interesting. And I think it only takes somebody really smart putting together a deck list and then just winning with it, going, oh, that's how you play Hakata, right? So I think that's what I'm wanting to see. I think La Sombra's a little bit more out of the box, right? Because there's some things that are a little bit more recognizable. So things like influence, things like schemes. They have great schemes.
Schemes and titles.
Right, and then they have some people we've been looking for, which is a double dominate character in Gia. So that's just something people were looking for already. So I think those are going to slot in a little quicker. And I think Hakata is going to take a little time to go, okay, here's how you play Hakata. But yes, I'm eager to see how it all works out.
Were you familiar with the World of Darkness kind of before you got into Rivals, or have you, like me, kind of had to learn that lore and learn some of the stuff going on there alongside the game?
Tangentially, I knew about it, right? I knew about World of Darkness from back in the day, but I wasn't close to it. I played a little bit of Vitesse, but not much. So I am sort of new to the universe. I'm really liking it. I kind of got into it once I got into this game, so I appreciate it. And I had to read a lot because it's had a lot of iterations, and that's interesting to me. But it's super interesting. I find it fascinating, and I really like the V5 stuff. Like, it definitely, what I feel like it has been done is that it's made it a little easier to figure out what's going on. So I appreciate that.
It's interesting. Now I've worked with several card games that have a very deep pool of lore and events that they go with them. Because L5R was very similar. I'd never dealt with that before. I knew nothing about the setting. And it's a world that players care deeply about. World of Darkness is very much the same in that you have people who've been playing this for decades. They are super invested in their clan or their character or, the events that happened in Chicago. And that can be a really rewarding setting to kind of play in because there's so much we can then do with that. We can feature different events and kind of make our own spin on things. So are you planning to attend any other Prince events that you hoping? You're in San Francisco, not SoCal?
So I'm in SoCal. We went up to Berkeley because, the LA group, I think, is a very connected meta. We know each other really well. It's like a little family.
Mhm.
And so we've been organizing trips up to places like Berkeley, which isn't that far for us. And I'll probably be I was at the Pasadena one, and then I'll probably be at the Burbank one, and then probably also San Diego, and then possibly Washington as well.
Oh, nice. I know I saw in your guys' Discord some people were putting together a trip to Oregon potentially
Yeah,
for
potentially.
Castle of Games. So yeah, you're definitely going to have some more local to you, and we'll see you again, and maybe a second win under your belt. Or are you
That
going to
would be
be
great.
treating it more like, I've got my win, I'm going to try and experiment a little bit?
That's what I did in this last one. I brought a deck that was different to this last one, and I just wanted to kind of see how it went.
Oh, Pasadena, you're saying?
The Pasadena, yeah.
Cool. And I suppose it'll be nice to try out things with Shadows and Shrouds. Now, are you planning to go to Gen Con?
Yes, making that happen too. It's the first time I've ever been to Gen Con.
Oh, really?
And I'm super excited. I've been wanting to go for a long time, and it never quite worked out. But now I have a great excuse because this is like this game that I've been playing, and I'm super eager.
I'm really excited for people to see, the twist that we're putting into the game with Gen Con, the changed out events to kind of support the narrative that this conclave is happening. The Camarilla has called all the princes together, and what that's going to do to mix up gameplay even more for people. So I look forward to seeing you there.
Yeah.
One more question for you. So if you are, if you're going to be a vampire, what clan are you going to be?
Yeah. So I've figured this out early because I knew I would be asked these things. Ravnos.
Okay.
Yes. And there's not many of us, right?
You and Coyote are both Ravnos fans, I know.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know if people haven't figured this out, so obviously it's not that great of a play on words, but my handle on Discord is Rav Yes. So if you're ever wondering why, it's just a play on words that people haven't picked up. So obviously it's kind of a failure, but I'm keeping it. But yeah, so that's my clan. I especially like what V5 has done for that clan. I think it brought some of these clans that have been a little less supported are starting to be more fleshed out, and I like that. So
what about Ravnos really appeals to you? Now, like, they are coming later this year in the
I'm
Dragon
excited.
and the Rogue.
Yeah.
What about their lore, about their flavor, are you looking forward to in Rivals?
I love the wandering aspect. I love that I always say this, and don't at me, but they feel a little bit like an attractive Nosferatu, right? They're sort of like they slink around, and they're they change their features, and they convince people of stuff, and they can be couriers. They can kind of go between stuff. They always know what's going on. But they're never necessarily like in the center of the spotlight, right?
Okay. Pulling the strings more.
Exactly, right? Like, they're around, they're always involved. They're causing trouble for people. Like, it's just fun. It's like a fun character to take on. And I just like that, like, secretive aspect, but also it's like the presence in the obfuscate, and the chemistry is what it used to be, and now that's been adjusted a little bit, and I think for the better. And I just think they're really cool. And it's also like the way that they've started to explain them as sort of as a world faction, right? So they have connections all over the globe in all these different contexts, and I think that's interesting too.
That's awesome. Any little bit of advice that you would give to people who are either planning to attend or considering attending a Prince of the City event?
I think here's the advice. This is a tough game to win. And I think if you go into the experience saying, I'm just going to have fun, I think that's the right way to approach it. It's not like a lot of other competitive games where you have a lot more control. Some days you just go and it just doesn't work out, and you can have the best deck in the world. I think that's fun. I think that's great. I think that if you take it too seriously, too overly seriously, it might have an emotional drain on you.
Sure.
But if you go in there saying, I'm going to have fun with a group of people that I really like, and we're going to sort of celebrate this game, and I'm going to get into it and I'm going to have fun and we're going to table talk in a good way, right? And at the end of the day, we're all going to be friends. We're all going to go get food together after, and and we're experiencing this game together. If you approach it that way, you're going to enjoy your time. Yeah, that's what I would say, and that's what that's why I've always tried to approach it. And I honestly just feel like I got lucky with Berkeley, and sometimes that's just going to happen. And like, yes, I've tried really hard to be really good, but I think I played with a bunch of really good people that also deserve to win.
Certainly.
And yeah, it's just you're gonna. I think the way I always put it is like, if it's a 4-player game, 25% win rate is great, right?
That's very true. That's a thing that I think people don't think about immediately, thinking 25% is terrible, but like that's not really.
Yeah.
And another thing that you said, you can have the best deck in the world and you can know how to pilot that deck perfectly, but you've also got to play the table.
Yes.
If you have 3 other people that are trying to shut you down, you're probably not going to win regardless of how great your skills are. So I think there are players who are just new to card games in general. And, I think show up, have a good time. We intentionally have made participation pricing pretty generous so that you get something fun, no matter how well you do. And that's done because, we know that it can be intimidating. You want to get something neat for your time. But even if you're super hardcore, you do need to be careful to not just paint a target on yourself.
Yeah.
And people aren't used to that. People aren't used to that in a head-to-head game. It's just go full bore all the time. And I think that's a little bit of a learning curve for people too. So good advice.
One last thing, I want to shout out to my group, the LA group. I do think it's the best. Obviously, I'm that's just my opinion. I think it's the best. I think it's best because it's like a little family, and I think that this game lends to that. And I think that that's the cool part, is that it lends to like this great group of diverse people that are just coming to have fun. And I think that I just have really, really liked it. It's been, in the sense, it's been the best group of gamers that I've ever played with.
Nice. Well, that's fantastic. And I hope that I am very impressed with the Southern California, meta and how active it is, how helpful everybody is. I know that you guys have, some people who are just making great decks and helping other people tune their decks and improve things. And I think in a lot of ways, that's a model that other areas can hopefully follow and continue to build up metas around the whole world, really. So thanks so much, Robert, for joining me. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed these interviews with our 3 winners from a couple weeks ago. And Robert, have an excellent night.
You too.